Hi guys, and welcome back to my channel. Today I'm here with another ranking video, and again I'm ranking my palettes. Today I'm tackling it a little bit differently. I'm going to just talk about the palettes that I have reached for no pan left behind of this year. So all the palettes that I have reached for every single shade of this year. So won't include palettes that I only reached for like 1 or 2 shades in, because I feel like to have a fair ranking I just want to talk about the palettes that I have reached for fully and not just like, you know, a setting shade or any corner shade, things like that. So I have quite a few palettes to talk about. I think I have exactly 30, but around that number, yeah, 30, 31 I think. So I'm going to jump into talking about those palettes, but before I do so, if you're new here, please consider subscribing. I would love to have you in the family. Let's jump into the video. So at the bottom of the ranking, we have a palette that very often ends up at the bottom, and that is my Book of Magic palette from Beauty Bay. This is not a bad palette, and there is a lot of beautiful shades in here, and the color story is pretty. It's quite a unique color story. The reason why I'm ranking this low is because I just don't reach for it very often. I don't often reach for blue eyeshadows, and when I do, I usually reach into my singles. Also, this has a lot of like deeper shades, like this one here is a deep brown, deep purple, black, really deep blue. It has a really deep like blue shimmer here as well with like a black base. And I just don't reach for deep eyeshadows like that very often, although I'm wearing black today on my eyes, black and yellow. But I don't know, I just don't reach for them very often, and that's why this palette is ranking at the bottom. The next palette, I'm a little bit sad that it ranks this low, but at the moment, I just couldn't see myself ranking this any higher, and that is my Love palette from Natasha Denona. I love the individual shadows in here. When I take these out and use in my singles collection, I do love them. I love these pink tones down here. They're absolutely beautiful. But I'm just not very inspired by this palette, and I know I'm happy to have it in my collection, but I never really picked this up to reach for it. Although today after work, I'm going to go see the Barbie movie, and I'm gonna redo my makeup and do a pink lip for that. So maybe I should reach in for this palette for that. I do have a few singles I want to reach for as well, but maybe I will complement with some more shades in here just to get some more use out of it. But yeah, I just never think to reach for this one, and it's not a very inspiring color story to me, so that's why it's ranking at the bottom. The formula is good. It's not the best Natasha Denona formula, but it's still good. So it's more like the color story rather than the quality. Next up, we have the Anastasia Subculture palette. This one is one that looks very well loved, as you can see. I have a lot of use out of this palette, and it's mainly because I've had it in different projects. I had a lot of these shadows in my Beauty A to C, like A to C eyeshadow edition last year. And then also had this as my Product Level Up palette last year. So this one got a lot of use. Actually, maybe it's 2 years ago since I did the A to C. I can't remember. But this has gotten a lot of use out of those. And there's a couple of shades in here that I absolutely love. I love Electric, that's my favorite. I love what's it called, Roxy. New Wave as well is a really pretty eyeshadow. So there's a lot of beautiful eyeshadows in here, but there's also a lot of deep shadows. And I talked about that before. I'm not a big fan of deep shadows. And all of these look a bit more colorful in here. They do show up quite muddy on the eyes, or like a bit more muted, I would say. So because of that, I don't love the full color story. Although looking at it now, it's quite a pretty palette. Maybe I'm ranking it a bit lower because we haven't hit autumn yet, and I will reach for this one more then. But this is the ranking at this point in time, and I know for sure that if I rank this again in like a month's time, 2 months time, I would do it differently. So this one for the moment ends up here. Next up, we have a palette that's very new to me, and it's also quite a high-end palette, but I just couldn't rank it any higher, and that is the Rowan Quad. This is a 75 degrees quad. I used this one in my No Pan Left Behind, and there are pretty shadows. These are definitely high quality eyeshadows. They're really pretty. I feel like some people would absolutely adore these. I'm sure some people will use this every single day and be absolutely, amazed with them. But for me, this is not my preference. I prefer more like sparkly eyeshadows. And yeah, this first shadow here is quite sparkly, and they have different textures in here, which is nice, but they're almost like cream shadows, and I just don't reach for cream shadows very often. They're more opaque. They're not like sparkly like topper shadows, which is again what I prefer. And it's just something about the formula in here that I don't love. And it's also used a quad. There's no mattes in here, and because of that, it's ranking at the bottom. I think this is like the 4th palette from the bottom. Next up, we have a palette that I'm actually wearing on my eyes today, partly, and that is my Colourpop Aha Honey palette. This is currently my level 2 palette in my Product Level Up, and you will get a spoiler in here if you saw my intro a couple days ago, but this is what my palette looks like now. Yeah, so Today I'm actually wearing the 3 middle shades here, so the 3 shimmers. And this palette is ranking at this point because it is a monochromatic palette. I like that there's yellows in here, but I would also like having these maybe as singles. I don't know. I just don't reach for this palette unless I want to go for a fully yellow look, and because of the lack of variety in here, it's ranking at the bottom. So we have reached the last palette in like the bottom of my ranking. When I sorted these out, I went first like by just looking at palettes like, oh, do I think this ends up in bottom, middle, or high, or like top? And then once I had those 3 categories, I sorted those palettes into categories, or like into order rather, because that kind of made sense to me, because it would be very overwhelming ranking all of these like as they come, I guess. So for me, next up is the Dreamy palette by Nabla. This is a beautiful palette, but I mean the color story is really beautiful, the tones in here are beautiful, but it does have these 2 like deeper shimmers which aren't my favorite, and the shimmers overall are quite satiny, which again isn't my preference. And again, the color story is really pretty, but yeah, it's just the shimmers that is a little bit lackluster for me. So next up we have another Colourpop palette. This one is the At First Sight palette with Raw Beauty Christie. This palette looks like this. I haven't played around with it too much, but when I have used it, it falls somewhere in the middle for me. It's like, I mean, it's a beautiful palette. The quality in here is really good, especially for Colourpop. But I don't reach for this one that often. Again, it just kind of disappears in my drawers. So I couldn't really rank it any higher than I do, because although the quality is nice, although there's a nice color story, I just don't reach for it very often, and I need to again familiarize myself with this one every time I pull this out in a video. I just say I need to get a better idea of this palette, and again, I do feel like that. So again, this is ranking in the middle. Next up, we have a palette that I very recently hit No Pan Left Behind on. I think this might actually be the last palette that I hit No Pan Left Behind on from this pile, and that is Natasha Denona Sunrise palette. This is currently in my No Pan Left Behind project, and I reached for all of these shadows very recently. I love the color story in here. It's really, really beautiful. Originally, I ranked this lower than I put it in today. Like, did this ranking yesterday, and I put this one lower, but then when I looked at it today compared to some of the palettes I already talked about, I was like, no, I would for sure prefer this one over the other ones, and the color story is so beautiful. I would say that this is, again, not the best Natasha Denona formula. Some of the shimmers in here are a bit more satiny, not the best, and the mattes aren't maybe the most blendable, but the color story is really, really stunning, and there's not really any shade in here that I don't like. The only thing is, like, there's a few kind of more repetitive shades like this. These 2 shimmers didn't need to both be in here. I mean, the yellows are kind of different enough, I would say, but it's mainly those 2 shimmers that are very, very similar. So, you know, if we could switch one of those out with something else, maybe like a yellow shimmer, that would have been amazing, but the palette is what it is, and I do like it, but it's not my favorite, hence it's ending up in this position. Next up, we have another Colourpop palette. There's a lot of Colourpop palettes in this like section, and the next one is my Going Coconuts palette. This is one that I used to rank higher, but I feel like it's kind of fallen a little bit lower recently because I don't know, I got in a lot more neutral tone palettes recently, and I don't know, I just feel like these tones aren't as unique as they used to be, but it's still a really good palette. The shimmers in here are really stunning. The white shimmer isn't the absolute best, but these 2 here are stunning shimmers, especially the middle one, which is called Cocoa Crush, and it's a really good standard like cool toned neutral palette, or like slightly cool tone but very, very neutral palette. So yeah, it's a really good option if you're looking for one, but it's not my favorite in my collection. So next up, I don't know what position we are in, but we have the Divine Rose 1 palette. This one here is a stunning one. Again, this is more cool toned. It looks like this. It is a beautiful palette. I know this is like cold favorites in the Pat McGrath kind of fan base. I think this one and the number 5, which is the Bronze Seduction palette, are 2 of the top favorites because they're also wearable. I love this palette. It is really, really stunning still, and looking at it now, I'm just like, maybe I should rank this one higher, but I don't know, it's just a little bit too cool tone for me. It's a bit more kind of purpley leaning mauves rather than like pink leaning mauves, which isn't my favorite. And again, a lot of shades in here are a bit deeper, but it is a really stunning palette, and this shimmer here is absolutely stunning. Like, you can't even pick it up on camera. It just looks very like white, I guess, but it is so textured, so sparkly, and it's so stunning. So I need to reach for that one more, but for now this palette ends up here. And I think another reason why a lot of cool tone palettes are ranking a little bit lower now than they might have in the past is because we are in the middle of summer. All of the weather haven't been fantastic here. I think these cool tone eyeshadows are a bit like further back in my head. So because of that, I think they're ranking a little bit lower than if I, for example, was to do this video in the middle of December. Next up, we have another Colourpop palette, and this one is the Sweet Talk palette. This eyeshadow palette looks like this. It's a really pretty, colourful, well, I mean, not super colourful, but there are colourful shadows in here. It's like a coral, peachy kind of color story. It's almost like monochromatic leaning, but it has some variety in it, like what the Anaha Honey palette don't have. Like it has like more brown shades, it has a bit more like orangey toned browns. It also have a bit more like almost pinky peaches here, pinky corals, and then more kind of pure corals. And these two shimmers here are changed, but they were used to be pressed glitters in very, very similar shades, so that's why I put them in here. But it's a really pretty palette. It's perfect for summer, and I feel like I can create a lot of beautiful looks with this. Yes, a lot of looks are going to turn out the same, but you do still have variety in it, which is why I like it a lot. And I am drawn to these tones at the moment, which is why it's ranked a little bit higher than I perhaps thought it would originally. Then we have my last Colourpop palette, and this is the Through My Eyes palette, which is one that I've long said is my favorite. And this one is looking very well loved now. It was my Perth Level Up Level 5 palette, which meant I got a lot of new pans in here, but I did have a lot of pans before as well. But I just love the color story in here. I think it's a very creative palette. You can create a lot of different looks, and you can do a lot of color combinations that you might not have thought of otherwise. But even though it is a creative palette in that sense, it is also a very good neutral palette. It's a good everyday palette for me, because you do get the kind of more neutral shadows. You get like more browns, you get a few more mauve tones, but you also do get those pops of colors, which I do really find fun. So that's why this is ranking the highest out of my Colourpop palettes. Also, the shimmer formula in here is the best that I've tried from Colourpop. Also, just remember that isn't my top Colourpop palette. I do have one more, which is going to come way further up in the list, but I don't know why. I just never kind of classify that as my Colourpop palette, because it's just a different one. You might know which one it is. So forget everything I said about that being my top Colourpop palette, because it's my second top, and the other one will come later. Next up, we have another Anastasia palette. This is my Amrezy palette. This one looks like this. I got this one as a gift a couple of years ago, and I do like this one, but I ranking this one a little bit lower because of a couple of reasons. First off, there's a lot of deepness here, which is useful. I mean, I guess I could have cut like maybe one of the shades, especially like this last one here. I feel like that one could have gone, in my opinion. Also, second reason is two shades here are very, very similar. There's a slight difference in it. One is slightly more mustardy, kind of orange, and one is slightly more kind of, I don't know, like mauve toned, undertoned. I don't know. You can see this one is slightly more mauve toned, and this one is slightly more like orangey mustard toned. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's kind of what I'm seeing in them. But those two are very, very similar on the eyes. And then the last reason why I'm ranking this one a little bit lower is because it has two pressed glitters in here, which is the shade Litzy and the shade Gemini. So these two right here. And those two are just absolutely awful pressed glitters. They're not good at all, and I don't like them very much. So this one can definitely have been lower down, even to like what's that, 12-pound palette, but at least a 14-pound palette like all of the other Anastasia palettes. I feel like making this one a 16-pound palette was a bit unnecessary, and that's why it's ranking a little bit lower. Next up, we have a mini palette, and this one is the Natasha Denona Mini Retro palette. This one looks like this. It's a really pretty color story, and you can create a really beautiful look with this, but it's not very versatile. I mean, I guess it is. I guess you could do like a two shadow look with these two, and they can do like a more kind of pink kind of, you know, just pink look, or you could create a look with a combination of the two, so you can make like 3 looks, I guess, from here, or like different varieties of 3 looks. When I used this palette, I used all of the shades in one look, and it created a really beautiful look, and it's a really nice, effortless palette. But I don't reach for these small palettes very often. They are useful, and I wish I reached for them more, but I just don't. But yeah, it's a really, really pretty palette, but it's not one that stands out in my collection. Next up, we have another Anastasia palette. This one is my Soft Glam. This one looks like this. It's a good neutral palette. I've had this for a long, long time. I can tell the formula in here is getting a little bit older. I can tell the shimmers are getting a bit more crumbly, but it's still a really good palette, and it has a lot of variety. Again, you have some more mauve tones, some more kind of warmer toned, and a few more neutral toned kind of browns in here. And you also have a good variety in the shimmers. You have more satiny shimmers, as well as a few more impactful shimmers in different tones. So it's an all-around good neutral palette, but it's just not an exciting palette to me, which is why it's ranking almost smack bang in the middle. The next palette we have is another Natasha Denona palette. This one is the Sendo palette. This is a palette that I didn't think that I would really like. I wasn't planning to pick this up for myself, but I got it very, very affordably off my friend Martina, and she was declaring from her collection and she let me buy it from a very affordable price. So I decided to pick it up, and I'm very happy I did, because I do actually love this palette now. I feel like there is a lot of different looks you can make with this palette. Again, you have like these, like look at these three here. You can create a really nice warm toned everyday look. You can create like a green look, obviously, with these shades here. You can create a really, really core look with these shades here, and you have a lot of variety in it. But also, I do feel like these green tones here match really well with the coral tones. I was a bit worried about how they would mix in one single look, but I feel like they do mix very well, and they create really fun looks. So yeah, I like this palette a lot. The quality is also pretty good. The shimmers aren't the best, but the mattes in here are, I would say, up there in like some of the best when I'm Denona. Not the best, but some of the best. So I'm really, really happy to have this one in my collection now. Next up, we have my Panda palette currently in my collection, which is the Huda Beauty Gold Obsessions palette. This one looks like this. I'm wearing this shadow here today, as well as this brown on my lower lash line. I have a challenge this month to use this one in every single look that I do, and I did so today as well. But yeah, I love this palette. It's really, really beautiful. I feel like the tones in here are stunning. These three mattes are like my kind of favorite type of mattes in this kind of, I don't know, like mauve tone with a slightly bit more warmth to it. It's like not super cool tone mauve, and I think that's kind of what I prefer compared to the Divine Rose 1 palette, which is more kind of cool tone mauve, more purpley mauve. This is more kind of peachy mauve, I would say. So I really love the mattes in here. Some of the shimmers are fantastic, like this gold that I'm wearing today. I'm obviously wearing some from the Honey palette as well, but I'm wearing this one like on top. It's a bit more sparkly, so I've topped this one on top of them, as well as this one here in the middle. Those two like more greeny gold or the gold shades in here are really, really stunning. This shadow here is also pretty good, which is the like more in the corner shade. It's a pink to gold shift. Those are really good. I would say the last three shimmers though, this one here and then these two here, are a bit more, I don't know, like they're a bit more crumbly. This one here especially doesn't really adhere very well. It's more kind of gritty, almost sparkly. It does create a nice sparkle, but it's a bit harder to work with, and I feel like these two are the same. This one here is the best out of the three, but it's a really good palette, and I'm excited to work on this one for my palette this year, or at least for the last 6 months of the year. So yeah, it's a fun palette, and this is ranking in the middle. Next up, we have a palette that would have ranked way lower a while back before I used to know Pan Left Behind, but since I did, I have actually re-fallen in love with this palette a little bit, and I would say this is the color story that would be like a perfect palette for me, but I used to never reach for this palette. However, I feel like I do reach for it more now, and that is the Red Dragon palette from Odenstein in collaboration with Judy. I'm going to hold this palette like this because it's easier, but this is what this palette looks like. It does have a really good color story. It does have like the kind of grungy greens that I love. It has more kind of neutral tones. It has like a peachy matte here, more kind of mustardy matte here. It has some beautiful like everyday shimmers, and it has like this kind of reddish brown that I love, as well as some more other shades down here. But I don't know if this would be a perfect palette for me anymore, because I'm missing a bit more kind of rosy tones, which is something that I've been into really recently. But it's still a really good palette that covers most of the bases that I like. So I just looked up, and this is ranking number 13. So for number 12, we have a palette that covers those rosy tones, and that is my Love Note palette from Beauty Bay. This one looks like this, and again has a lot of those rosy tones. It has kind of the pink ones, the more peachy ones, as well as more of the purple ones. But this is a really beautiful, like romantic palette, hence the name Love Notes. And I just love this palette. It's not one that I reach for every single day, but it's just something about the tones in here that I'm really, really drawn to. So yeah, I think this is a stunning palette. It's not the best if you're a deeper complexion than me, and I feel like this could have been a bit more versatile, I guess. You do have a little bit of depth in this shadow here, ruby as well as glove, maybe in mahogany as well, but those are really the only mid-tone to deep shades in here. The rest are very, very light. So this is more of a palette targeted towards lighter skin tones, which isn't the best, but it's just something that really works really well for me, and it creates really effortless looks, especially when I don't want to go too deep. So for me, it works really, really well, but you know, I see the flaws in this palette too. but it's one that ranks pretty high for me personally. So in 11th position, we have another Pat McGrath palette. This one here is the Moonlit Seduction palette, which is the, I was going to say the newest mothership, but they just released the number 12. This is 11, right? No, this is 10. So they released number 11. So this is what this one looks like. It's a really cool, like, I don't know, it's a really nice neutral color story. It does have a little bit more rosiness to it, but it's also overall quite neutral. The special shades in here are not baked, and I prefer the baked formula, but these are really, really stunning still. And again, I bought this one off my friend Martina, and it wasn't one that I was planning to pick up, but I do really like it. As you can tell, it's ranking relatively high, and I think this one is a really nice neutral color story. It does create some more smoky looks, but it can be shared out to more of an everyday palette as well. And I feel like this is a really good versatile palette because you can create a few more different looks. I mean, the mattes aren't super versatile, but the shimmers somewhat, I mean, maybe they're not. I don't know, they're all kind of sparkly. You have like a more white kind of silver shade, a gold shade, like a blue to purple duochrome with a warm base, almost like a blue-brown pigment, but like it also has like a really good purple shift to it. And then you have this more kind of, I don't know, champagne shift, but it's something about this that it's really, really stunning, and I'm still excited to reach for this one. It's definitely not the best quality when it comes to the motherships, but I think for the color story, I do really like this, and I'm excited to play around with it more. So we have come to the top 10, and in 10th spot we have my Tiny Marvels palette from Sydney Grace. I really like this palette a lot. I've mentioned that before. It's a really beautiful color story. It does have a kind of colorful shadows, but they are more wearable. They're more kind of muted colorful shadows, which is why I feel like this is such a good palette. It's also right up what I kind of connect with Sydney Grace, which is really, really buttery pigmented mattes that are super easy to blend, but they're still that kind of soft, muted feel. They're not like a really colorful brand. They're more kind of on the wearable side, and this is kind of what I sum them up with. And also the shimmers are fantastic. They're really, really foiled, pigmented, and yeah, they're just amazing. They're not really that sparkly. If you want more kind of like a more kind of scattered sparkle effect, Sydney Grace isn't for you. They're more kind of like full-on metallics, and I guess for me, that kind of more kind of everyday. Again, it does go with their vibe, but this palette is really, really good, and I do recommend it a lot. Then for 9th spot, we have this palette here, which I actually always say is a similar color story to the Tiny Marvels palette, but this is the more saturated version, and that is the Club Nebula palette with Ayana Kanelquist and Kaleidos. This one looks like this. It does have similar kind of tones, but you can see this are way more saturated, and you have more depth here as well. Also, the shimmers are different. Some of these shimmers are a bit more, I would say, subtle, but you do have these kind of more sparkly shadows and some more duochromes and things. So this is more of the kind of colorful, amped up version of the Tiny Marvels palette, but I love them both. This one ranked slightly higher for me because it does have those sparkly shimmers, which I really, really like. But overall, I do like them almost the same, but if I had to rank them, this one ranks slightly higher. So next up, we do have another Huda Beauty palette. This is actually the Nude Lights palette. I know this one got a bit of a mixed review. A lot of people didn't like this one. Out of the three that came out, they came out with the Nude Light, the Nude Medium, and Nude Rich. The Nude Rich is, I think, too dark for me, too smoky. Again, I don't really like those looks very often. And the Nude Medium is one that I was considering, but this is definitely the one that I was drawn to. It does have those soft romantic tones again. And again, it doesn't go very deep. Even the deep brown in here isn't super deep, but I do like that. I like doing softer looks on the everyday, which is why this one is such a good palette. I also like the shimmers in here. This one is again like a pinky kind of gold shifty shade. This purple is absolutely stunning. I love that purple shade. Like, that's kind of my shade of purple. And then these two almost like rose gold shades go really well with the palette as well. You do have a good variety in the matte. You have more of like a purpley kind of mauve. It's not super purpley, but that's probably like my least favorite in here. You do have like a pink transition as well as more of a slightly warmer peachy tone down here. So you do have a variety in the mattes, but I mean, overall it does create kind of similar looks, but it's the kind of looks that I'm into at the moment. So this is why this comes in at place number 8. So for 7th place, we have my Norvina palette from Anastasia. This is again more of the kind of pinky romantic tones, but you do have a bit more warm tones in here as well. And the shimmers in here are really stunning, especially for being Anastasia. I've talked about this before, but this has recently become my favorite Anastasia palette. And you can see it looks very well loved. Again, this was in my product level up, and I had some pans in it before as well. But I love this palette. It's really, really stunning. I wouldn't really change much in it. Maybe like the shade Drama, I don't really love. But other than that, I think this is a really stunning palette. I think it's a good formula, and the color storage is something that really speaks to me at the moment. I can create any look that I want. I can create, like I said, more kind of warm tone shades and more kind of pinky tones. This kind of really cool toned shade Soul would work if I want to get like a super cool tone look. And then you have more kind of a neutral brown as well. So you do have more variety than you might initially think when you look at this palette, because it does look very purpley pink, but there is a lot of neutral tones in here too, and that is why I love it so much. In 6th spot, we have another Natasha Nona palette. This is the Natasha Nona Biba palette. This is one that I was working on my product level up for level 1, and this is what it looks like. I haven't actually technically completed my goal yet because I still need to get a couple more uses on the shade Tone right here, but working on it in my product level up, I hadn't reached for this palette before, but I really fell in love with this formula. The mattes in here are really, really buttery soft. They're like up there in the same quality as the Natasha Nona Gold palette. The shimmers I would say aren't as good, but the mattes are, and the cream tea powder in here are so good. Sometimes I feel like with cream tea powder from Natasha Nona, they create hard pan, they're not that easy to pick up, but these ones are super good. There's a few in here. There's the shade Tone, which I'm working on, Rayon, Tour, and Spot. Those are like the cream tea powder in here, and they are absolutely amazing, all of them. And I feel like you have everything you need here for like a neutral matte. And why I like it a lot is because I can pair this with my Indie Shimmers. If I just want a palette for like mattes, I can pull this one out, and that's kind of why I wanted it. You do have 3 shimmers as well. You have the shade Rustic, Shine, and Monroe. And yes, they are beautiful shimmers, but I don't know. I just prefer this one for the mattes. That's kind of why I like it. But I have really fallen in love with this one, and yeah, it's ranking very high, and I'm excited to keep playing with this palette. So in 5th spot, we do have another Pat McGrath palette. This is the last one I'm going to rank today. And this one here is the Utopia Dream palette. This is the first one that I ever got. I got this as a gift, but again, this is more kind of pink tone, but you do have a little bit of variety again. And you do also have this kind of hot coral shade down here. This one here is a multi-chrome. It goes into like a green. I don't know if you can pick that up. I think you can pick it up in the mirror right there. And then these two as well. This one goes from like a pink to like a blue shimmer. You can pick it up there. Or like a pink to like a bluish purple. It's super stunning. And then this one here as well is like a pink with a gold shift, but I don't know, it's just super dimensional. And again, these 3 are bakes, this one is not, but I do love this palette so much. The shades in here are stunning. You can create some really beautiful looks. Even the 2 like regular shimmers are quite sparkly, which I like. And you know, with all of the Pat McGrath palettes, all of the mattes can be sheared out quite a lot, so you can create like a more warm toned crease or more of a kind of mauve tone crease. And yeah, I love this palette so much. I can't wait to play around with it more. And I'm happy that I picked this one up first because it has proven to be my favorite Pat McGrath palette so far. So I'm happy that I got this one first. And you know, the other ones that I have I like too, but this one is still the top. So we have come to like my top palettes, I guess now. That was the 5th space, so I would say this is like my top palettes. So in 4th position we have the Rose Quartz palette by Huda Beauty. This one would have ranked higher if I ranked this 6 months ago, but this has fallen down a little bit just because I feel like I'm lacking the variety. This one does create like a really beautiful cool tone eyeshadow look. You know, you have like the more pinky tones, the more mauve tones, the more gray tones, but overall it just creates more cool tone looks. The shimmers in here are amazing. They're very sparkly for being mainstream shimmers. It is a beautiful palette overall. I'm really happy that I have this one in my collection. But yeah, I feel like I love other things more now, which is why I have 3 palettes ranking above this one. But overall, it's still one of my top favorites. And again, if I rank these ones later in the winter, this one might rank higher up again. So for the top 3, I feel like these could switch like at any point. I mean, even to be fair, the top 5 I feel like could switch around at any point in time. Like today, I actually feel like I might have ranked this differently than I did yesterday when I did this ranking, but I'm going to stick with what I said yesterday. So for palette number 3, we have the Kaleidos Sashimi City, which is the Futurism 7 palette. This one looks like this, and yeah, it doesn't have much variety in it, like which I've been talking about, but this is just a perfect everyday palette for me. If I just want to create a beautiful look, I can reach for this palette. I have everything I need. I have like the kind of, you know, soft kind of transition shades. I have these beautiful shimmers. I have everything that I need, honestly, and I would create a beautiful look with this. I could create like one look with this without using all the shades, or I can use a few different ones depending on what I want to go for. But yeah, I love this palette if I just want to go for something simple. If I don't want to think about what I'm wearing, this one I can reach for, and I know I create a beautiful look. And the shimmers in here are the sparkly formula that I like. It does have a few shifts to it as well. And yeah, it's just a really, really good palette. I do think this one has been discontinued, or it will be. I think they're discontinuing all of the Futurism palettes. But yeah, I love this palette. I'm really, really happy that I picked this one up. It's the only Futurism palette that I own, and there was a while when I want to pick up more, but this one, when I heard that they were going to get discontinued, this was one that I for sure wanted to pick up, and I'm so happy I did because I love this palette. You know what? I'm actually going to switch my ranking from yesterday. I said I'm going to stick with what I said, but I'm going to switch them around. So again, in second place, which was first place yesterday, but now I'm re-ranking them, it is my last Colourpop palette, which I hinted of earlier, and this is the Star Wars Mandalorian, the Child palette. This palette is stunning. I love this palette. It was my product level up level, was it level 4? Level 5. Level 5, right? I can't remember. Yeah, level 5, I think. I worked, no, it was level 4. Yeah, I think level 4. But anyway, I have pan on every single shade in here now apart from this one, and I just love the tones in here. I think this is a beautiful color story. I am so impressed that this came from Colourpop because it's such an amazing color story, and it's so on brand as well. The greens in here are such a unique undertones. They are obviously quite green, but something about them then creates almost like a neutral toned green. They're almost like a silvery green, like sagey green almost, and I love that. These greens here, the 6 here, create a beautiful look. You can mix and match, but overall those create a really beautiful look. And then I love making more of a neutral look with these here, which is why it's ranking really high, although it is almost like a monochromatic palette. I mean, if you look at these, it would be a monochromatic palette, but if you look at these separately, they are really, really beautiful, like neutral tones. So because of that, it does have the variety that I need. I could easily use this one as like an everyday palette. I could use these 3 here if I wanted to do a simple everyday look, and then if I wanted to venture out into more color but still wear them on an everyday basis, I did have these 6 right here. So I love this palette a lot, and I've spoken about it so much before, so I'm not going to rant on about it too long. But it's such a good value, it's such a good palette, and I do really, really recommend it if they still have it around. So what then beat out the Child palette very last minute? That is my Natasha Denona bronze palette. This is one that I love. I loved it since I got it. I got it for my birthday last year, so in November last year. And I used to love this palette. I know it is very monotone. I know I have talked so much about variety, but it's just something about this palette, the undertones, the like richness, the like heat, the spiciness in it. I just love this palette. There's something about it that I love. I know a lot of people think this is repetitive. I know a lot of people say every look you create with this palette ends up being the same. And yeah, they're somewhat right. Yes, there isn't too much variety in it. Yes, you have like different transition shades, but yeah, they are very orangey toned or very warm toned. But this one has my heart. I love this palette so much. Every look that I create with this just makes me feel amazing. I love it. You can tell I'm very passionate about this palette. Yeah, I think it's just undertones in here. I think the quality as well. You can create more kind of subtle looks, like the shade Beach here is more of a subtle crease shade. You can put that in the crease, and then like one of the more subtle shimmers. You can create more like ready looks with these 2 here. You do have these more kind of purpley tones as well, which complements the warmness a lot. And then even the shimmer shades, you know, some of the more traditional shimmers. And then you also have these more kind of sparkly shimmers as well, like this one here especially. And then silk. So silk and true bronze are more kind of sparkly shimmers. And yeah, I just love this palette a lot, and I had to rank this one at the top. Again, this one and the Mandalorian Child palette are very interchangeable. I ranked this one top yesterday, but then I switched it to this one today. So those are all of the palettes that I wanted to rank. I have a big mess of palettes next to me that I need to clean up, And I think this has been quite a long video anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up here. If you enjoyed it, please go ahead and give it a thumbs up. Let me know what your favorite palette that you've used so far this year is. And otherwise, I hope you're having a lovely day wherever you are, and I will catch you in my next one. Bye, guys.